How could you make your church small group effective in outreach? Well, welcome to my imaginary small group, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. It is commonly recognised that while all churches need to be evangelistic, that healthy churches grow, not just evangelistic ones. And this is because the warmth of the fellowship and relationship within a church is really a key part of what will cause people to stay when they visit your church. And the small groups within the church are an absolutely key part of this. Church small groups are where a bulk of the warmth, the fellowship, the encouragement, the accountability and the support take place, and often where more of the learning takes place than most would recognise. In this little teaching in front of us, I would encourage you to take notes, because there's going to be quite a number of points, but they have great value for your church small group. A very useful perspective on church outreach can be gained from a little teaching called the Four Pistons of Evangelism Mobilisation. Now, if you've got a car and it's got 4 pistons, you need 4 pistons to be able to drive along. But if only 3 work, the car will be spluttering down the road, and if only 2 pistons work, the car won't really be going at all. Now, when it comes to outreach, we can mobilise people at 4 different levels in the same way. First of all, we can mobilise individuals. Secondly, we can mobilise people through small groups. Thirdly, we can do congregational outreaches. And fourthly, we can work together with other churches to reach out within a region. And the point of the illustration is that every one of these is needed. Individuals need to be able to engage people in conversations about spiritual things where they are every day. Small groups create a relational environment that people can come into, where they can feel the warmth of Christian love in combination with conversation, discussion, and even teaching about the Christian message. Congregations can then do things that you can't in a small group and can provide special services. You can run marriage courses and various things like this to which all the members of a congregation can come. These are tools to be utilised in outreach. And then we need to work together as churches, because to take an Australian study as an example, 6 out of 10 people may not have a church-going friend. This means that even if we mobilised all of our members to outreach, 6 out of 10 in our communities still might not hear. So our churches do need to work together to get the gospel to every person or every home, or things like this now and again. Now, to give a couple of observations about this simple illustration. First of all, which of these 4 pistons do you think is the most important one? The individual, small group, congregation, or combined? I would suggest to you that it's the individual. And this is because 100 mobilised members within a church who go out to engage conversations in their workplaces and neighbourhoods in the course of their everyday lives are going to be capable of far more than any talented pastor or even small group leader running programs that people might be invited to. However, if the mobilisation of individuals to outreach is the most effective, what does that make the home base for evangelism? And I would suggest that it makes the church small group the home base for evangelistic outreach. And this is because most people cannot sustain a focus on outreach, personal witness by themselves. And you can't get that to happen from a congregational point of view. In other words, if I'm the pastor and I'm speaking to a congregation, I can motivate and teach as much as I like, and people can listen to me and nod and smile. But they might be thinking about what they're going to have for lunch afterwards, and I can't tell. Personal accountability and encouragement only take place in that context of relationship. That's in the small group. And this is why it is the only way I believe that a sustained focus on personal outreach can be established in a church if this small group dynamic is a part of it, which is why we are all here today discussing this. So, in history, the early church, we know from the Bible, they met in large groups in the synagogue and in small groups from house to house. Then persecution came, they only met in the small groups for maybe 300 years till the time of Constantine. The point is very simple. The mission of the church is also the mission of the church small group. And what does this mean for our small groups? It very simply means that if outreach hasn't been a focus within them, then we need to find a way to get that happening, because this, I believe, is the way God has intended it to be. However, there's many good things happening in our church small groups as they are. We don't want to override this. And so the question really is, how could we reinsert the mission of the church and the mission of the small group into the small group in a healthy and sustainable way and without overriding everything else? So that's what we're going to look at today. The one thing I am going to assume during this is that you are small group leaders within a church where your pastor or key church leaders are trying to build a sustained culture of evangelistic focus. and in particular behind seeing members equipped to engage everyday conversations. And therefore what we're looking at in our small groups is how we could take those same messages and amplify them in our lives and in the lives of our small group members, because that is a recipe for some really good momentum and fruit. So let's start 4 points. First of all, we want to include our mission as a category in our annual goals. Annual goals in a small group, maybe you're meeting at the start of the year to discuss them, would typically be in 3 main areas. How do we increase our love for God, our love for one another as believers, and our love for others in the world around us to make a difference? This third one is where the work of the gospel comes in, and this is where multiplication becomes a natural end goal that we have in sight for our small group. Then what we could do in this session at the start of the year is get everybody to make a list of friends that they would like to reach out to in the coming year. And then you list anything that you consider that could be a hindrance to that person coming to faith in Christ. These are things you can pray for during the year and things that you could engage them in conversation about. And then thirdly, make a list of any of the interests that those friends have, because these are your bridging or connection points through which you could spend time together with these friends, whether individually or as a small group. Having included our mission as a category in our goals, we now need to make space for it in our weekly program. The typical program in a small group, whether it's been articulated or not, is easily summarised by a thing called the 4 W's. And that is that there is a welcome, followed by worship, then the word, and then works. Welcome is saying hi to everybody and making sure they feel loved. Worship is where we turn our focus from on one another through to a focus on God. We then look at the word and consider its application to our lives. And then the leader, the works part, points forward and says, great, thank you for hosting us today. Can I remind you next week we meet for this purpose at this time and at this place, and gives any other announcements. What we're simply suggesting here is that we include witness as one of the points in our agenda. This is one of the things that we could look at in an average week. Now, out of these 5 things, which 2 must we always have? The answer, as unspiritual as it might sound, is the first and the last. That is the welcome and the works. This is because we always need to welcome people so they are cared for, but also leadership is significantly about vision. And there are people who will lose interest in a church small group if they don't have a sense that it's going somewhere, that they're learning and growing or achieving something for the kingdom. And so it's essential that the leader always casts vision and introduces things that are coming up so we know where we're going and why. And so the way this works is that the amount of time you would spend on worship, word and witness can be nothing through to all the rest of that time in a given week. For example, if every week you had 1.5 hours only, a barbecue would equate to 1 hour and 25 of welcome, saying hi to each other, followed by 5 minutes in which the leader thanks the host, those who prepared the food, says, great to see you to any new friends that joined, and then promotes the next thing that everybody could come along to. Were you to have a prayer meeting, this might equate to 5 minutes of welcome, 1 hour and 20 of praying and worshipping, and then the last 5 minutes, the works, where the leader again casts vision. But what this means is that on other occasions, witness can be a component. It could be given 5 minutes, it could be given 20, 30 minutes, or the entire middle time within that sandwich with a welcome and the works always as a part of that picture. So we have reinserted the mission of the small group as a category in annual goals and created space for it in our program. What we now need to do is some planning for the year ahead. And in this, firstly, we want to give a recognition to the natural opportunities and seasons within a year. Now, most churches will have a year calendar and a program. It's essential in our church small groups that things our key church leaders have put on that calendar go in our calendar first. Christmas and Easter would usually be the natural outreach seasons, but there might also be a church camp and a variety of other things, so they go in our small group program. Secondly, because we now have some natural outreach seasons, imagine it's Christmas and Easter, though it could be other times, what we can now do is begin to focus outreach things into these periods. That way we can focus on other things in other parts of the year. So for example, your church leaders may have been equipping you in certain things to do with outreach, how to engage a conversation, to turn a conversation with 3 great questions, how to share your faith. These things can be revised in the 6 weeks leading into an outreach season. So if Christmas is the focus, from mid-November onwards, maybe you begin to talk about the friends you've been praying for all year. How could they be invited? But then you revise that if you're in a conversation and someone says something you disagree with, how do you turn that into a conversation without disagreeing and ending it? What do you mean by that? Where'd you get that idea from? Have you considered? Very simple. It puts these things in long-term memory. And as a result, what you're doing is amplifying what your church leaders are teaching, which amplifies the effect and the results. And another thing that we can do in recognition of seasons is intentionally program to connect with the friends we've been praying for throughout the year in these periods of time. We've listed their interests, and so these could become connection points. And then to organise it, we look at the gift, shape, ability and passions and experiences of our members. And we try to facilitate teamwork where people are able to work according to their strengths. And so for a simple analogy, one person has the gift of the gab, another has a boat, and another has a whole lot of non-church friends who'd love to go fishing. So why not take this guy's friends in this person's boat with this person who's really good at conversing with people they don't know? So having reinserted the mission into our goals for the year, having created space for it in our program, having planned for the whole year, what we really come down to now is the way we lead in the application of this plan with a goal to sustaining the focus. Here are some simple tips, and I point out that sometimes here it's the small things that make the difference. I would recommend to you that every quarter, every 3 months as a leader, that you cast vision for the coming 3 months, letting your members know what your small group goals are and content is in that period, but also helping them to see the opportunities that exist for outreach, both individually as a small group and within the wider church programs. Secondly, you've listed people's names to pray for, and so spend time praying for them, maybe every 2, 3 or 4 weeks as a habit. And then you could ask for regular testimonies, because these will encourage and build momentum. And again, maybe every 3 or 4 weeks you do this during your group time. And then finally, as a small group leader, after that testimony, you could use that as a springboard to again motivate your members for their mission and to remind them of lessons that have previously been taught. This way, the plan is being applied and you can actually sustain right through a year things that may have been taught at the very start of the year. I want to take this now and put it on a calendar for you in a different order, but to demonstrate the very simple planning process that's involved in this. First of all, congregational events go on your calendar first, like Christmas and Easter, a marriage course, and anything else that your church plans. Secondly, put in there reminders for yourself at the beginning of every term or quarter where you're going to share vision to help your members see the opportunities in front of them. And then plan when you're going to connect with your non-church friends through various social activities, as well as maybe some outreach things as well, like an Easter or a Christmas celebration or barbecue. Then in the lead up to those outreach seasons, consider spending 5, 10 or 20 minutes in your weekly meetings across a period of a few weeks, revising lessons that have been previously taught. This way they become fresh in the memory of your members, and the chance that they're going to be applied in their everyday conversations and everyday life will be greatly increased. And then finally, regularly invite testimonies, as well as regularly praying for your non-church friends, because these build momentum and provide you with a platform or a springboard off which you can do even more encouragement and more reminding as the leader of the group. This will build culture. However, how much time is this all going to take? I mean, your group might exist primarily as a prayer group or a support group or a Bible study group or for some other purpose. This next diagram shows you how much time this actually takes. You see, when you have a testimony, it's not your whole program. This is only around about 5 minutes of your time meeting together. When you're spending time in the 6 weeks before maybe Easter and Christmas, revising outreach lessons previously taught, again, this could be 5, 10, 15 or 20 minutes. In fact, the only time it's going to take up your whole time is going to be when at the start of the year you spend a whole session looking maybe at outreach and how you could outreach to friends during the year. And then on the social occasions when you're going to gather to do something socially to engage with your non-church friends. And in fact, some of those activities could be on a Saturday, and maybe your small group meets on a Wednesday. So even there, it's not actually taking up your small group time. The only other thing that might take a whole session would be if your pastor asked you to look at outreach actually as a topic in your studies or your discussions. And you would follow, of course, your pastor's lead if he or she did that. And the point is that what we're talking about here isn't difficult. It's about bringing intentionality to the way that we lead our small groups in recognition of the fact that the church has a mission. You see, we might enjoy our fellowship together, but we can fellowship and love each other in heaven. We might enjoy our prayer and worship, but we can do this in heaven. We, of course, can serve one another as well, and we can learn together, but we could also still do this in heaven. The one thing we can't do in heaven is tell other people about Jesus and introduce them to Him. That's why it's our mission, because it's the one unique thing that we can do here in this period of time on planet Earth. So please consider these planning habits, because they can make a big difference, and especially if what we're doing at a small group level is in sync with what our church leaders are trying to do in the entire congregation. That can amplify the learning and the application and the results. And yes, this is going to take some work to begin, because while these are meant to be habits, they won't start as habits. It's like when you first learn to drive a manual car and you have to put in the clutch and try and turn from first to second and third gear, and you have to think about it. But when you've been driving a while, it's your habit. You don't even think. You're having a conversation while you drive and change gear. This is going to take a little bit of effort to start because it won't have been your practice. However, this is quite achievable. It can be achieved and it can make a really big difference. So please consider this. May the Lord make you effective and making your members effective.